She pressed her dead husband's wedding ring into her coat pocket the morning she stepped off the train, and she did not cry. Not once. Not even when the wind hit her face like a slap and reminded her that no one in Red Hollow, Montana was waiting for her with anything resembling warmth. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train had been 14 hours late. Eliza Novak knew this because she had counted every minute of it sitting upright on a wooden bench in the last car, her leather traveling bag wedged between her knees, her hands folded in her lap with the practiced stillness of a woman who had learned long ago that fidgeting solved nothing. Around her, other passengers dozed or complained or pressed their faces to the frost-edged windows. She did none of those things. She simply sat and breathed and reminded herself that she had survived worse than a delayed train. She had survived Joseph. That thought alone kept her spine straight for all 14 of those hours. Red Hollow materialized out of the gray Montana morning like something half-remembered from a dream. A cluster of buildings pressed low against the land, a water tower leaning slightly to the east, a main street churned to brown mud by a week of uncertain weather. Steam billowed from the train's engine as it groaned to a stop, and Eliza stood before anyone else in her car had properly woken. She smoothed her coat. She adjusted her hat, dark wool, simple, no ornamentation she couldn't afford. She picked up her bag, and she stepped down onto the platform of a town that had never asked for her. The cold was immediate and absolute. Not the damp, seeping cold of Bohemia in November, which she had grown up with and understood, but something drier and more honest about its intentions, a cold that simply told you it existed and expected you to manage accordingly. Eliza exhaled and watched her breath disappear into it. There were perhaps 8 people on the platform. A station master, 2 men waiting for freight. A woman in a good wool coat who glanced at Eliza once, assessed something, and looked away. A boy sweeping mud off the near end of the boards. And the sheriff. She knew him immediately, not because of the badge, though the badge was there silver against a dark coat, but because of the way he stood. Separate from everything. His back was not quite to the crowd, but nearly. He was watching the freight come off the train, with an expression that suggested he was thinking about something else entirely, and whatever that something was, it did not please him. He was tall, broader than Joseph had been. Dark hair gone early to gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had made certain decisions about itself and refused all further discussion. He might have been anywhere from 35 to 45. He looked like a man who had stopped celebrating his own birthdays some years prior and felt no particular grief about it. Eliza walked directly toward him. She heard the station master say something behind her. She did not stop. The sheriff turned when she was 4 feet away, and she saw his eyes for the first time. They were a particular shade of gray-green that reminded her of the Vltava River in early spring, not beautiful exactly, but alive in a way that water always is, and very, very tired. "You are the man who placed the advertisement," she said. He looked at her. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted in the way that things shift when an expectation meets a reality and finds them poorly matched. "I am," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Careful. "I am Eliza Novak." She extended her hand. "From the Bohemian region. You will have received my letter of response dated the 14th of October. He shook her hand once briefly. His grip was firm and entirely without performance. "Ethan Calloway." He looked at her bag, then back at her face. "I expected someone different," she said. "Yes, they always do." A pause settled between them. On the platform, the boy with the broom had stopped sweeping and was watching openly. The woman in the good wool coat had not moved away, which meant she was listening. "My advertisement specified practical experience," Calloway said finally. "Cooking, household management, the ability to manage a wood stove in winter conditions. I managed a household of 7 from the age of 14, Eliza said. I baked bread commercially for 2 years in Prague. I can maintain a wood stove, repair basic plumbing, and keep accounts if you require it." She paused. I also speak English, as you can observe, along with German and Czech. I am thorough, I am not expensive, and I do not cause trouble. Something crossed his face then. Not warmth, not quite, but something in the vicinity of reassessment. The position is through March, he said. Room and board provided. Wage as stated in the advertisement. I understood the terms. The house is plain, he said, and she had the impression this was a warning he felt compelled to deliver, though she couldn't tell whether it was on his behalf or hers. I live alone. I keep my own hours. I don't require conversation. Neither do I, Eliza said. Another pause. The boy with the broom had drifted 3 feet closer, in a way that pretended to be accidental. Calloway picked up her bag before she could protest. Not a gesture of gallantry, she sensed, but of efficiency, the way a man picks up something heavy, because putting it down again wastes time, and nodded toward the far end of the platform. Wagons this way. She followed him. Behind them she heard the woman in the good wool coat say something to the station master in a voice pitched just above a whisper. She caught 2 words clearly, foreign and alone. She filed them away and kept walking. The house was, as he had said, plain. 2 stories clapboard, in need of paint on the east-facing side, where the weather had gotten at it. A front porch with a bench that looked like it hadn't hosted a human being in recent memory. A yard that was doing its best under the circumstances of October frost and apparent abandonment. Inside was worse in the specific way that houses become worse when a person lives in them alone for too long. Not dirty exactly. Calloway struck her as a man who maintained minimum standards out of something close to stubbornness, but emptied out. Surfaces bare of anything personal. Curtains that had once been patterned and were now simply faded. A kitchen where the stove clearly worked because it had to, not because anyone cared about it. The cold came through the window frames in thin, persistent fingers. Eliza set down her coat on the kitchen chair, rolled up her sleeves, and opened the stove door to assess the situation. The flue draw is weak on the left side, she said. You've been losing heat for some time. When did you last clear the ash box completely? Calloway, who had set her bag at the base of the stairs and was now standing in the kitchen doorway with the particular stillness of a man unsure what his own kitchen had become, said, I don't. I clear it when it needs it. It needs it now, and has needed it for some weeks. She stood. Do you have an ash shovel, or shall I look for one? There's a bin out back. Thank you. She found the ash shovel, the bin, and also a loose board on the back porch step that she made note of. She spent 40 minutes on the stove, and when she was finished, it drew cleanly and threw heat properly. For the first time, she could tell by the way the temperature in the kitchen changed within 20 minutes, becoming something you could feel on your hands instead of something you simply endured. Calloway came into the kitchen at some point during this process, poured himself coffee from a pot on the back of the stove, and stood drinking it while she worked. He didn't offer to help. She didn't ask him to. There's flour, she said without turning around. And I saw salt pork in the larder. I'll make cornbread tonight unless you have an objection. No objection. And the window frame in what I assume is my room, the small one on the second floor facing north, needs new caulking before the real cold arrives. I saw oakum in the shed. A pause. You went through the shed, he said. I needed to know what I was working with. She finally turned and looked at him. Was that a problem? He studied her for a moment. No, he said. It wasn't. The first week passed in something like negotiation. Not spoken negotiation. Nothing between Eliza and Ethan Calloway was spoken if it could be managed otherwise. But a careful daily adjustment of territory and expectation, the way 2 people who must share a space will eventually arrive at a functional arrangement if neither of them is unreasonable. She cooked breakfast before he left in the morning. He ate without complaint, and with what she eventually recognized in a man who expressed very little as genuine appreciation. A slight pause before he picked up his fork, a particular quality of attention to what was on the plate. She did not prepare elaborate things. She was not trying to impress him. She made what she knew, what was practical, what kept a body warm and working through a Montana morning oats with salt and a scrape of butter or eggs when the neighbor's hens were generous, or corn porridge when nothing else was available. Plain food made correctly, which she had always believed was worth more than complicated food made carelessly. He came home for supper. This surprised her. She had half expected a man like him to eat at the saloon, or wherever the town's single men took their evening meals. But he came home, removed his coat and his gun belt, with the same efficiency he did everything, and sat down at the kitchen table at a time that remained consistent within 15 minutes across 5 days running. She found this oddly reassuring. On the 4th day, she found the crack in the kitchen wall where cold air was finding its way in, packed it with rags soaked in linseed oil, and then moved the small kitchen table 6 inches to the left so that the chair where Calloway sat for breakfast was no longer in the direct line of that draft. He noticed on the 5th morning that the chair was moved. He didn't say anything. But he looked at the wall, then at the chair, then at the place where she was standing at the stove, and something in his expression did a thing she could not name. She turned back to the oats. The trouble started at Martha Callahan's dry goods store. Eliza had been in Red Hollow for 9 days when she went to purchase flour salt and a spool of heavier thread for the curtain repairs she'd planned. She had made a list in the organized way she made all lists, items ranked by priority estimated cost, noted beside each one. Calloway's household funds in the small purse in her coat pocket. Martha Callahan was a solid woman in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back efficiently, and eyes that missed nothing in the way of women who have operated businesses in small towns long enough to understand that information is currency. There were 2 other women in the store when Eliza arrived. She noted them, nodded politely, and went to find her first item. She heard the whisper before she reached the flour barrel. His housekeeper there saying, "But who takes in a foreign woman alone in a man's house?" Eliza's hand closed around the flour scoop. "No family here, no husband that anyone's mentioned." "She speaks English well enough," the second voice allowed with a particular tone that managed to make this a criticism, which only means she's clever about it. Eliza filled her measure of flour with a steady hand. She brought her items to the counter. Martha Callahan served her without comment, counted her change correctly, and wrapped the thread without being asked. "New in town," Martha said, as a statement, not a question. "Yes, ma'am, 9 days." "How are you finding the sheriff's household?" The 2 other women had found reasons to remain near the fabric bolts. "The stove draws well now," Eliza said pleasantly. "The larder is organized. The curtains will be repaired by Friday." Martha's mouth did a small thing that might in a different face have been a smile. "He eat regular now. Every morning and evening, yes. That's more than he managed on his own for 2 years. A pause in which Martha appeared to weigh something. "You manage all right out there on your own." "I manage very well, thank you." Eliza picked up her parcel. "Good day, Mrs. Callahan." She walked back through the store. The 2 women by the fabric bolts watched her go. She felt their eyes between her shoulder blades like a pressure distinct and deliberate. She did not alter her pace. She didn't intend to tell Calloway. It seemed like information without a useful application. Nothing that reporting it to him would change, and nothing she required assistance managing. She had heard worse than small-town suspicion. She had survived worse. What 2 women said in a dry goods store about a woman they didn't know was the least of the things she had endured. But that evening he came home later than usual. His face when he came through the door carried something different, not his ordinary quiet, which she had come to read as simply his particular weather, but a specific tight quality around his jaw that she associated with the town, rather than with whatever internal territory he usually inhabited. He sat down. She put supper in front of him. He ate 4 bites and then set his fork down and looked at the window for a moment. "Mrs. Callahan told me," he said, "that there was talk in town today." Eliza was at the stove. She did not turn around. "There is always talk in small towns." "About you," I assumed. A pause. "I can speak to people," he said. "I'm the sheriff. I can make clear." "No," she said, firmly. immediately. She turned then because this was worth turning for. "If you speak for me, they will never see me as real," she said. "I will only ever be the woman the sheriff defended. That is not what I came here to be." His brow drew together. "What did you come here to be?" The question was more direct than she'd expected from him. She considered it honestly. "A person who handles her own affairs," she said, "in a place where I can do that without someone deciding it isn't allowed." He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was warm now, properly warm in the way it hadn't been before she'd attended to the stove, and the lamplight did something specific to the planes of his face that she chose not to examine too closely. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you." He picked up his fork again, and they ate the rest of the supper, in the particular silence that had begun. She was noticing to feel less like absence, and more like a language neither of them had learned to name yet. It was a Wednesday in the third week of October when she found the ledger. She was not looking for it. She was reorganizing the small desk in the parlor, which had accumulated the particular archaeology of a man who managed a great deal of paperwork, but found the management unpleasant. Old receipts, notices from the county, a half-completed report in Calloway's careful angular handwriting, and underneath all of it, pushed to the back corner, a leather-bound ledger that had been used extensively and then apparently abandoned mid-year. She opened it not to pry, but because a ledger told her what kind of household she was managing. What she found inside was not household accounts. It was the town's records, land parcels, tax payments, survey numbers cross-referenced with county registration. She could see in the columns that someone had been recording it carefully for several years, and then around March of the current year, the entries had become irregular and then sparse, and then stopped. She turned to the last used page. There was a note in different handwriting, heavier, more hurried than Calloway's, that said only Whitmore. RR acquisition. County clerk notified. Don't file before spring. She closed the ledger. She sat with her hands flat on the cover for a moment, thinking about what she had read, fitting it against the things she knew from years of keeping accounts for men who believed a woman with a pen was only decorating. Then she put the ledger back exactly where she found it. But she remembered every number on every page. That Friday, Calloway came home in the middle of the afternoon, unusual enough that she looked up from the curtain she was re-hemming when she heard the door. He came into the kitchen, stood there. "A man arrived on the noon train," he said. "Railroad man. Name of Gerald Whitmore. He'll be in town some weeks, he says, on a land survey project." Eliza kept her needle moving through the curtain hem. "I see," she said. "You've seen his name before." It was not a question. He had sharp eyes, and apparently he watched her in ways she hadn't fully accounted for. She set down the curtain. "In the ledger in your parlor desk." He was very still for a moment. "You looked at that ledger." "I was reorganizing the desk. I didn't look for it." She met his eyes. "I noticed numbers, Sheriff. It's a habit from long practice. I looked at the entries for perhaps 10 minutes before I understood what it was and put it back." Another still moment. "What did you understand it to be?" he said. "County land records," she said carefully. "With irregularities I would not expect in a properly maintained public record." She paused. "And a note suggesting that someone named Whitmore had a specific interest in the spring filing date." Calloway pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. It was the first time she could recall him sitting in the parlor during daylight hours. "The land south of town," he said. "The railroad wants it for the new line extension. There are 4 families with legal claim to parcels of it. Whitmore represents the acquisition interest. And the irregularities in the record." He looked at her steadily. "What would you need to prove an irregularity?" She thought for a moment. "The original county registration documents, the survey records from the initial settlement filings, and any correspondence between the county clerk's office and the railroad dated in the last 18 months. Why that specific time frame? Because that's when your ledger entries changed character. Someone began adjusting the recorded parcel boundaries. Very small adjustments, nothing that would register as obvious error, but consistent in direction." She paused again. in the direction that would shrink the family claims and expand the unregistered land that the railroad could legally acquire. Calloway was quiet for a long time. "How do you know that?" he said. Not suspicious. Something more like a man recalibrating. "I kept accounts for 7 years," she said, "for men who did not believe I understood what I was writing down." She held his gaze. "I always understood. I was simply convenient to ignore." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up the first real suggestion that winter was not far off coming down from the mountains with its particular intentions. "I will need to see those original documents," she said, "if you can obtain them. They're at the county seat, 3 days' ride." "Then someone will need to ride there." He looked at her for another moment. Then he stood. "I'll leave Monday morning," he said, and walked back to the door. He was halfway out when he stopped, one hand on the frame. "Eliza," he said. First time he'd used her name. She looked up. "Lock the ledger in the desk drawer tonight," he said, "and don't mention it to anyone." "I wasn't going to," she said. He nodded once, and the door closed behind him. She sat in the quiet parlor with the curtain in her lap and the lamp burning low, and the first real cold of autumn pressing against the glass. And she thought about a man who had lived in silence for so long, he'd forgotten what it sounded like when someone finally listened. She thought about the ledger. She thought about Gerald Whitmore stepping off the noon train, and she understood with the particular certainty of a woman who had survived one disaster by keeping her eyes open that the winter ahead was going to require everything she had. Ethan Calloway left for the county seat before the sun was fully up on Monday. Eliza heard him moving through the house in the dark, the particular sound of a man who had learned to live without waking anyone, though for years there had been no one to wake. Boots on the floorboards, the low creak of the front door, the muffled sound of his horse being brought around from the small stable out back. She lay still in the narrow upstairs room and listened to him go. And when the sound of hoofbeats finally faded into the gray morning, she got up and started the stove. 3 days, he had said. Maybe 4. She had work to do. The first thing she did before the water was even hot was go back to the parlor desk and open the locked drawer with the spare key Calloway had left on the kitchen table beside a note that said, "Only in case you need to reference it." She took out the ledger, brought it to the kitchen table, and began reading it again. Not quickly this time, but the way she had been taught to read numbers by a man in Prague, who believed precision was a moral virtue, moving her finger along each column and building in her mind the shape of what had been recorded, and more importantly, what had been changed. Because she had been right. Someone had changed it. The alterations were small enough to be plausible. A parcel boundary shifted by 50 feet, here a survey marker adjusted there. Nothing that would register to a casual eye as anything other than a correction. But Eliza had spent 7 years reading documents that were meant to confuse her, and she knew the difference between a correction and a concealment. Corrections acknowledged the original entry. Concealment erased it. Whoever had gotten into this ledger had not corrected. They had overwritten, and they had done it carefully in ink close enough to Calloway's to pass a first inspection, but not close enough to pass hers. She turned to a clean page in the small notebook she had bought from Martha Callahan's store on her second day in town, and she began to write. By the time the morning light had come fully through the kitchen window, she had filled 6 pages. She was on the porch recalking the north window frame on Tuesday afternoon when the wagon came down the road. She noted it the way she noted everything automatically, without making a performance of it. A hired wagon from the livery. 1 driver, 1 passenger. The passenger was a man of perhaps 50, in a coat that cost more than anything currently hanging in Ethan Calloway's wardrobe, wearing the particular expression of a man who had traveled to a place he considered beneath him and intended everyone to know it. Gerald Whitmore. She recognized him not from any previous meeting, but from the type she had known men like him in Prague and Brno, in every city where money moved faster than conscience. The type who smiled at women in service positions and looked through them at the same moment. He looked through her on his way past. She went back to the caulking. But she watched the wagon until it turned toward the hotel, and she made note of the time, and she added it to the small notebook that was now living in her coat pocket. The town shifted that week in the way small towns shift when money arrives. Not all at once, but in small adjustments of attention, like a dog that has caught a new scent. Whitmore appeared at the saloon. Whitmore appeared at the land office. Whitmore appeared at Martha Callahan's store, where he was charming in the specific way of men who believe charm is a tool, and therefore deploy it without relationship to genuine feeling. Eliza heard this from the butcher's wife, who told her on Wednesday morning, without being asked, in the friendly warning tone of a woman who had lived in Red Hollow long enough to recognize a predator in good clothing. "Buying drinks for the county surveyor," the butcher's wife said, wrapping the salt pork with quick, efficient hands. "2 nights running. Frank says they were at it until near midnight." "The county surveyor," Eliza said. "That would be Mr. Aldous." "Dan Aldous, yes. Been the county surveyor 11 years, never bought a drink in his life that I knew of. Now suddenly he's got a new friend with deep pockets." She handed over the parcel. "Sheriff's away, you said." "Back by Thursday." The butcher's wife gave her a look not unkind, but waited. "You be careful out there alone, you hear me? That Whitmore has a way of sniffing out situations." "I appreciate the concern," Eliza said. She walked back to the house with the salt pork under her arm, and a very specific feeling behind her sternum that she recognized as the particular alertness that preceded something she would need to be ready for. She sat down that evening and rewrote her notes in order of evidence weight. Then, she made a list of the questions that Calloway would need to answer when he returned. Then she made a second list of the questions she could potentially answer herself, and the methods available to her for doing so. The second list was longer than the first. He came back Thursday evening. Not 4 days, 3.5, which meant he had pushed the horse harder on the return than he would normally consider reasonable, and Eliza noticed this, but said nothing about it, only put a plate in front of him while his coat was still damp at the shoulders from the ride. He ate standing up, which she had never seen him do before. "The original survey records at the county seat," he said between bites, "have been partially replaced." She looked up from the stove. "Replaced?" "New documents. Filed correctly, signed by Dan Aldous. Dated 8 months ago." His jaw was tight. "Except that I pulled the corresponding registry book and the filings referenced in the new surveys don't exist. The registration numbers are fabricated." "I found the same pattern in the ledger," Eliza said. "The original parcel boundaries for the Heller farm, the Dixon land, and the 2 parcels south of the creek have all been adjusted, by 50 to 200 feet each, consistently inward." He looked at her then, for the first time since he'd walked through the door. "You've been working through the ledger. You left me the key. I left you the key in case you needed to reference it. Not—" He stopped, set down the fork, looked at her notes, which were spread across the kitchen table, organized into 3 clear sections, with a logic that he followed immediately and visibly. "How long did this take you?" 3 days, she said. "I also have a list of dates. Whitmore arrived on the noon train Monday and had his first meeting with Aldous that same evening. He's had 2 subsequent meetings, both at the saloon, both late." "Who told you that?" "The butcher's wife." Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but in the general direction of it. "Aldous is the weak point," Eliza continued, because they did not have time for expressions. "He's the one who filed the replacement surveys. That means he either did it willingly and can be pressured, or he did it under coercion and can be convinced. Either way, he's accessible in a way that Whitmore is not." Calloway was very still. "You've been thinking about this for 3 days, he said. "I've been thinking about this since I found the ledger," she said. "It's what I do. I find the error in the record. I trace it back to its source. That is what 7 years of keeping accounts teaches you." A long silence. Outside, the wind had found its ambition and was making its opinions known about the west side of the house. "The families," Calloway said finally. "The Hellers. The Dixons. They don't know. I assumed not. If they knew their land boundaries had been falsified, they would have come to you. Yes. He looked at the window. I need to ride to their properties tomorrow. I know. And Aldous. Also, yes. He turned back to look at her. There was something in his face that she couldn't quite classify, something that sat between gratitude and something more unsettled, more personal. Why are you doing this? He said. This is not you were hired to manage the house. This isn't. I know what I was hired for, she said. But I have eyes, and I have a particular set of skills, and the situation requires them. She met his gaze steadily. And I do not like men who falsify records to steal from families who can't defend themselves. I have seen what that does. A pause. I have had it done to me. The kitchen went very quiet. He looked at her in the way that people look at each other when something true has been said without decoration, and neither of them knows quite what to do with the honesty of it. Bohemia, he said. My husband's family land. The words came out flat because she had made them flat through repetition, pressing them down until they couldn't cut anymore. After he died, his brother produced documents that gave him the property. The documents were false. The local official was bought. She folded her hands on the table. I had 60 days to contest it. I had no money for a lawyer and no man to speak for me, and no record of my own marriage that the official would accept as valid. She looked at him. So I left. The silence this time was different, heavier. Calloway pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Not quickly, with the deliberate movement of a man choosing to stay in a moment rather than leave it. How long ago? He said. 14 months. And before Red Hollow. Denver for 8 months. Work where I could find it. She said it plainly without asking for anything from him. I saw your advertisement in a Denver paper. I was running low on options that did not require compromises I was not prepared to make. He absorbed this. I'm sorry, he said, for what happened to you. She looked at him sharply, not because the words were unwelcome, but because she had not expected them from him. Plain words of that kind, not formal condolence, not pity, something more direct. Thank you, she said equally directly. They sat there for a moment that extended past its natural edges in the warm kitchen, with the wind working against the west wall, and the lamp burning between them. And Eliza became aware that something in the geometry of the room had changed, that the distance across the table was not the same distance it had been a week ago, though neither of them had moved. She gathered her notes. I'll write it up in order for you tonight, she said. A full account of the ledger irregularities with the original entry reconstructions, where I can verify them. That way you have something documented before you speak to the Hellers. All right, he said. And Calloway. She looked up. He waited. Be careful with Aldous, she said. A man who can be bought once can be bought again. And whoever is paying him knows that he's the weak point too. He nodded once. Go to bed, he said. You've been up since before I got back. It was the most personal thing he had said to her. She went upstairs. She was halfway through writing the account when she heard the sound. Not the wind, not the house settling something deliberate. A footstep on the back porch where the boards were loose and she had not yet gotten to them. She set down her pen. She sat very still and listened with the particular attention of a woman who had learned not to dismiss the things her body already knew. The footstep did not repeat. But the silence that followed it was a listening silence, not an empty one. She went to the doorway of the small room and stood where she could see the top of the stairs without being visible herself, and she waited. 30 seconds, a minute. Nothing. She went back to her writing, but she did not close the notebook. And she did not let the lamp burn down before Calloway finished moving around in the room below her. She could track his location in the house by the sound of the floorboards, which she had catalogued in her first week, without knowing she was doing it. And she did not exhale fully until she heard him settle. She wrote until the account was complete. Then she sealed it in an envelope, wrote Calloway's name on it, and put it beside his coffee cup for the morning. Then she lay down in the dark and thought about the footstep. She told him about it the next morning directly and without drama while he drank his coffee and read through her notes. He looked up immediately. Where exactly? Back porch. The third board from the door, the one that's warped upward on the left side. Did you see anyone? No, and it didn't repeat. He set down the coffee. His expression had gone to a specific quality of alertness that she recognized from the mornings when he came home, carrying tension from the town, that quality of a man recalculating threat. Whitmore moved fast, she said. You think it was connected? I think it was the same night you returned with county documents, and I've been working through the ledger for 3 days, she said. I think the timing is notable. He was quiet for a moment. You should have woken me. There was nothing to do, she said. And you'd ridden hard for 3 days. By the time you reached whoever it was, they'd be gone. She looked at him. I wasn't frightened. I was paying attention. There's a difference. He studied her. Most people would have been frightened. Most people haven't had 14 months of practice. She topped up his coffee without being asked. Read the rest of the account. The section on the Dixon parcel is the most important. The boundary adjustment there is large enough that it would give the railroad access to the water rights for the creek. Without those water rights, the line extension can't function. That's the piece they actually need. He went back to reading. She went back to the stove. After a few minutes, he said without looking up, You reconstructed the original parcel boundaries from memory. Yes. From a 10-minute reading of the ledger. 8 minutes, she said. But yes. He looked up then and said nothing, which she was learning to interpret as a specific kind of emphasis. She made the oats. He spoke to the Heller family that morning and the Dixons in the afternoon. She did not go with him, he had not asked her to, and it was not her place to ask, but she watched him leave from the front porch with her notebook in her pocket, and the particular feeling of a woman who has set something in motion and must now wait for gravity to do its work. He was gone 6 hours. When he came back changed. Not obviously. Calloway never did anything obviously, but there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there when he left, and when he sat down at the kitchen table, he sat down heavily in the way of a man who has been carrying weight at a distance and has finally put it down. The Heller family has a deed, he said. Original from 1871. It references the creek boundary by a landmark, a specific rock formation, 2 cottonwood trees marked with survey cuts. He looked at the table. The trees are gone, cleared 18 months ago as part of a road improvement by the county. Eliza sat down slowly. The landmark, she said. Without it, the deed reference becomes ambiguous. Yes. And if the surveyor then files a correction that redraws the boundary to a different reference point, the original deed is still legal, he said. But it becomes unprovable in a dispute without the physical markers. He pressed the heel of his hand against the table. 12 families settled this valley. 3 of them have land that borders the railroad's intended route. If those 3 lose their boundary disputes, the railroad acquires 700 acres of the most productive farmland in this county for the cost of filing fees. The kitchen was very quiet. The county clerk, Eliza said. He receives the filings. He would have to process the replacement surveys. Tom Briggs has been county clerk for 19 years, Calloway said. Honest man, or I believed he was. Believed? He looked at her. He signed the new filings, Eliza. She absorbed this. Then either he's been turned, she said carefully, or he signed them without understanding what they were. Replacement surveys would look like routine corrections. If Aldous presented them with the proper documentation, Briggs might not have questioned it. Can you tell which it is from the documents? She thought. Not from what we have here, but the correspondence between Aldous and Briggs would tell us. If Aldous explained the substitution, even obliquely, Briggs would have been complicit knowingly. She looked at him. If there's no such correspondence, Briggs was deceived. The correspondence would be at the county seat. Yes. He was quiet for a long time, looking at the window. I need a reason to go back there, he said, officially, without Whitmore understanding why. A pause. He has people watching, or he had someone on that porch last night. Either way, the moment I make a second trip to the county seat, he'll know I found something. Then don't go officially, Eliza said. He looked at her. Send a letter to Tom Briggs directly, she said. Sheriff to County Clerk Professional Correspondence. Ask him to provide copies of recent survey filings for Red Hollow parcels. Frame it as a routine audit before winter property tax preparation. Something that explains the request without explaining the reason. Briggs might alert. If Briggs is clean, he'll send the copies without question and never mention it to Aldous or Whitmore. If Briggs is bought, he'll stall, or the copies will arrive incomplete. She met his eyes. Either way, you learned something. Calloway looked at her for a long moment. You planned that before you suggested it, he said. While you were telling me about the trees, she said. Yes. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the same territory brief, involuntary, quickly contained. She had never heard it from him before. It did something to the quality of the room that she chose carefully not to examine. All right, he said. I'll write the letter tonight. I'll draft it if you like, she said. I know the language that sounds routine. I spent 3 years writing correspondence for men who needed things to sound unremarkable. He considered this. Yes, draft it. She reached for her notebook. And across the table, Ethan Calloway watched her write with the focused, unsentimental attention of a man who was beginning to understand, with some alarm, that there was a very large difference between the woman he had expected to answer his advertisement and the woman who had. That night, after the letter was written and sealed and set aside for the morning post, Eliza washed the supper dishes in the quiet kitchen and listened to the wind work through the eaves and thought about footsteps on a porch at midnight, and about a man who had said "I'm sorry" in the plain way of someone who meant it, and about 700 acres of farmland that 4 families did not know they were in the process of losing. She was drying the last dish when Calloway appeared in the kitchen doorway. She hadn't heard him coming. He moved quietly, which she respected as a professional quality, and was occasionally inconvenient in close quarters. The letter, he said. You wrote it in a different hand than your notes. She looked at him. Yes. Mine is more identifiable now. If anyone compares correspondence, a different hand is harder to trace back to a source. He absorbed this. You thought of that. I think of most things, she said, not with pride, simply with the acknowledgement of what was true. He leaned against the doorframe. Not exactly relaxed, Calloway, she suspected, was never exactly relaxed, but present in a way that was different from his ordinary transit through rooms. When we find what we need, he said, and we bring it to the county court, it will come out that you worked through the ledger, that you helped reconstruct the records. He paused. Your name will be attached to this. She set down the dish. I know. Whitmore is well connected. The railroad has money and lawyers. I know. You're not frightened. She turned to look at him fully. I am, she said honestly. But being frightened doesn't change what's right. And it doesn't change what I'm capable of doing. She held his gaze. I was frightened in Bohemia too. It didn't help me. Knowing what to do next was the only thing that helped. He looked at her across the kitchen for a moment that stretched. You are not what I expected, he said. And this time it was not the careful assessing tone of a man recalibrating. It was something quieter, something that did not quite know what to do with itself. No, she said simply. I don't imagine I am. And she picked up the lamp, said good night, and went upstairs. Behind her she heard him remain in the kitchen for a long while before she heard him move. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind and to the house that had begun. In some way she could not precisely name to sound different than it had when she arrived. Not empty. Something closer to its opposite. The letter to Tom Briggs went out on Friday morning's post. By Friday afternoon, Gerald Whitmore had invited Ethan Calloway to dinner. Calloway told Eliza about the invitation. The way he told her most things now, directly without preface, standing in the kitchen doorway while she was in the middle of something else, as if he had learned that the most efficient way to think through a problem was to say it out loud in her direction. He sent a note to the office, Calloway said. Formal, requesting the pleasure of the sheriff's company at the hotel dining room Saturday evening. Says he wants to discuss the railroad's plans for the region and the economic benefits for local landowners. Eliza didn't look up from the bread she was working. He knows you went to the county seat. Either that, or he's making social calls to every official in town, and I'm simply next on the list. Is that what you believe? A pause. No. Then he knows. She pressed her knuckles into the dough. The question is what he thinks you found. Or what he thinks I didn't find. She looked up at that. He was watching her with that quality of attention she had come to recognize as his version of engagement still focused processing. If he believed you found something damaging, she said slowly, he would not invite you to dinner. He would apply pressure through other channels. The invitation means he thinks he can still manage you. She returned to the dough. Which means he doesn't know about the ledger. Or he knows, and he's confident enough not to care. That's possible too, she allowed. But men like Whitmore prefer to neutralize threats before they become public. Dinner is neutralization. It's an offer. Of what? Of a version of events where you're on the right side of the railroad's expansion. She set the dough aside. He's going to tell you that progress is coming, regardless that the families will be fairly compensated, and that a smart man makes friends with the future. She dried her hands. And then he's going to find some way to suggest, without saying it directly, that your cooperation would be remembered. Calloway was quiet for a moment. You've dealt with men like him before, he said. I was married to one, she said. A smaller version. Fewer resources, same methods. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was full, the kind of silence that holds something neither person is ready to put into words. Go to the dinner, she said. Listen to everything. Don't agree to anything and don't refuse anything. Be exactly what he expects a small-town sheriff to be. And what is that? A man who can be reasoned with, she said, provided the reasoning is expensive enough. Something moved across his face. You want me to let him believe he's winning. I want him comfortable, she said. Comfortable men make mistakes. Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, picked up his hat from the hook by the door, and left for the afternoon. Eliza stood in the kitchen and listened to his boots cross the porch, and thought about the letter to Tom Briggs, and about comfortable men, and about how much time they had before one mistake became too many. Dead. The reply from Tom Briggs arrived Tuesday. It was not what she expected. Calloway brought it in from the post without comment and set it on the kitchen table while she was writing. And something in the deliberate way he set it down. Not a drop, not a slide, but a careful placement told her before she opened it that the contents were significant. She opened it. The letter was 3 paragraphs. Professional in tone. The first paragraph acknowledged Calloway's request for copies of recent survey filings. The second paragraph explained that several of the filings in question were currently under administrative review and could not be released until that process was complete. The third paragraph, which was only 2 sentences, said that Briggs appreciated the sheriff's diligence and looked forward to cooperating fully in due course. She read it twice. He's stalling, she said. Yes. Which means either he's protecting the filings or someone told him to protect them. She set the letter down. How quickly could a message reach Briggs from Red Hollow? 2 days, maybe less if someone rode hard. She looked at him. Whitmore sent word after your dinner. Saturday night to Tuesday morning, Calloway said. Yes. Then Briggs is bought. She said it quietly, but without softening it, because soft words didn't change the fact. Or frightened enough to act like it. Calloway pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. He had been at the dinner Saturday, had come home afterward without volunteering information and gone to bed, and she had not pressed him because she had learned the geography of his silences well enough to know which ones needed time. But now she pressed. Tell me about the dinner, she said. He looked at the letter. Whitmore is good, he said. Better than I expected. He spent 40 minutes not saying anything that could be repeated in a court. and making me feel the entire time like I was in a reasonable conversation between reasonable men. What did he offer? Nothing directly. He talked about the railroad's investment in Montana infrastructure. He talked about how sheriffs in progressive counties were generally well remembered when contracts were distributed. He talked about a land parcel 2 miles north of town that would triple in value once the rail line was established. A pause. He talked about all of this while ordering the most expensive wine on the menu and making me feel like a man who was being offered a seat at a table he didn't know existed. And you. I listened. I asked the questions a man asks when he's interested but cautious. I thanked him for the meal. His jaw was tight. I told him I looked forward to seeing what the railroad's plans meant for the region. He believed you. He believed he was winning, Calloway said, which is different. She absorbed this. Then, the Briggs letter means we lost the clean legal path. Even if we reconstruct the original parcel records from the ledger without the official county filings as corroboration, we can't prove falsification through the normal channels. Whitmore controls the normal channels. Then what do we have? She looked at her notebook. The ledger. My reconstruction of the original boundaries. The deed from the Heller family that references the missing cottonwood markers. She turned a page. And whatever the Dixons have. The Dixons have a survey map, Calloway said, drawn by the original county surveyor in 1869. Hand-drawn, not a filed document, a working copy he gave the family when he completed the survey. She sat up straighter. Does the map show the creek boundary? In detail. With the cottonwood markers? With markers I haven't verified yet, but yes. She pressed her hands flat on the table. Calloway. If the hand-drawn map predates the filed surveys by 2 years, and it shows the boundary markers that the new surveys claim don't exist, that map is independent corroboration that the markers existed and the boundaries are where the deed says they are. He was very still. It's not from the county system, she continued. Whitmore can't reach it. He can't alter it because he doesn't know it exists. She looked at him directly. That map is the piece he doesn't have. It's one family's working document, Calloway said carefully. A good defense lawyer could argue it's informal. Against a hand-drawn survey by the county's own official signed and dated, showing features that the current file documents claim were never there. She held his gaze. What judge looks at that and rules for the railroad? A long silence. I need to look at that map, she said. I'll take you out there tomorrow. She blinked. To the Dixon property. You'll see things in it I won't, he said simply. You know what to look for. It was not a compliment exactly. It was more like a statement of operational fact delivered in the same tone he used for everything practical. And yet, something about it settled in her chest in a way that felt different from practical acknowledgement. All right, she said. Tomorrow. They rode out to the Dixon farm in the early morning, when the cold was at its most direct and honest, and the ground had that particular hardness that comes before the first real snow. Eliza had not been on horseback since Bohemia. She did not mention this, and Calloway did not ask. She managed. The Dixons were a family of 4, a husband and wife in their 40s, 2 teenage sons who were politely fascinated by Eliza in the way of young men who rarely see new faces. Harold Dixon was a careful man, methodical in the way of farmers who understand that carelessness costs more than it saves. His wife Clara had the handshake of a woman who had built fence and hauled water and did not feel the need to pretend otherwise. Clara Dixon produced the map from a tin box under the kitchen floorboards, while her husband watched Eliza's face with the particular attention of a man deciding whether to trust someone with something irreplaceable. My grandfather kept it, Clara said. Said the surveyor told him to keep it safe that filed documents could get lost, but a family copy was a family's protection. Eliza unfolded it on the kitchen table. It was 60 years old in handling, if not in age. Creased at the folds, the ink faded to a warm brown, but clear. The surveyor had been thorough in the way of men who took pride in their work. Every landmark was noted. The creek ran across the bottom of the map in a careful, wavering line. And at the boundary corner, drawn in precise, unambiguous detail, were 2 trees marked with survey cuts labeled in the surveyor's small handwriting. E. Cottonwood blazed, N. face, 1869. Eliza looked at the location, looked at the scale, looked at the distance markers. "Where is this location now?" she said, relative to the road. "That corner." Harold Dixon leaned over. "That's where the county crews cleared brush summer before last, part of the road improvement project." Eliza looked at Calloway. He looked at her. "The trees that were cleared," she said to Dixon, keeping her voice careful and even. "Do you remember if any of them were cottonwoods?" Dixon's face went through something. "Well," he said slowly, "there were 2 big ones, yeah, right at that corner. Been there long as I could remember. I thought it was odd to take them down, but the county foreman said they were interfering with the road drainage." He paused. "You're telling me those trees were my boundary markers?" "I'm telling you this map says they were," Eliza said, "and that the current filed surveys claim the boundary is 40 feet south of where this map places it." The kitchen was very quiet. "40 feet," Clara Dixon said, very quietly. "That's the well." "Yes," Eliza said. "They're trying to take our well," Clara said. Not a question. Not even outrage, yet more the flat, horrible recognition of something you suspected but hadn't let yourself believe. "They're trying to establish a boundary dispute that would give the railroad access to the water rights," Calloway said. "Your well sits on the disputed 40 feet. Without access to that water, the rail line can't supply the engines on the southern stretch." Harold Dixon had gone very still in the way of men who have just understood the full shape of something and are deciding what to do about it. "What do we do?" he said. "Right now," Calloway said, "you let us make a detailed record of this map. Every measurement, every marking, every notation." He looked at Eliza. "I'll need 2 hours," she said. "And good light." Clara Dixon moved to clear more space on the table without being asked. They were an hour into the documentation when one of the Dixon boys, the older one, Thomas 17 and serious-faced, appeared at the kitchen door. "Pa," he said, "there's a rider coming up the south road. Don't recognize the horse." Everyone in the kitchen went still at the same moment. Calloway was on his feet before Thomas finished the sentence. "How far?" "Quarter mile, maybe. Riding easy, not hard. But he's watching the place." "Watching how?" "Looking at the fences as he comes," Thomas said. "Not like someone who's lost, like someone who's counting." Eliza's hand had gone flat on the map, automatically covering the notations she'd been recording. She looked at Calloway. "Finish what you have," he said quietly to her. Then to Harold. "Is there a back way out of the property? Across the creek and through the north pasture, comes out on the Millhaven Road. If that rider comes to the door, you don't know why the sheriff visited. We were discussing a complaint about stray livestock. Nothing more." He looked at Harold, then Clara. "Can you hold to that?" "We've been holding our own for 20 years, Clara said. Her voice was steady as a fence post. "We can hold to that." Eliza wrote faster. Her handwriting compressed, but remained legible. She had learned long ago how to record accurately under pressure, and that skill did not leave her because of a rider on a south road. She got the final boundary notations, the surveyor's signature and date, the scale marker, and the specific description of the cottonwood blazing. She folded her notebook closed. "Done," she said. Calloway was at the window. Riders stopped at the fence, just sitting. "Watching?" Thomas said from the doorway. "Yes." Calloway turned. "We go out the front. Normal. Thank the Dixons for their hospitality. Ride north on the main road as if we came from town and were returning to town." "And if he follows?" "Then I know who sent him," Calloway said. "And that's information too." Eliza folded her coat and looked at Harold Dixon. "The tin box," she said. "Move it. Not under the floorboards tonight, somewhere they won't think to look if someone comes with legal papers." Harold's expression said he understood exactly what she meant by legal papers and exactly what he thought of men who arrived with them. Clara's mother's Bible box, he said. Nobody touches that. Good. She extended her hand. Thank you for your trust, Mr. Dixon. He shook it. Firm, brief, the handshake of a man transferring something important. They went out the front. The rider at the fence was still there. A man in a plain coat on a gray horse positioned just far enough away to claim coincidence. He watched them mount. He watched them turn north. He did not follow. But he watched them all the way to the first bend in the road, and Eliza felt his eyes the same way she had felt the eyes of the women in Martha Callahan's store as a pressure deliberate and specific, intended to land. She did not alter her posture. She rode straight. They were nearly back to town when Calloway said without turning his head, "You're quiet." "I'm thinking," she said. "About?" "About the fact that Whitmore sent a rider to watch the Dixon property, which means someone told him we were going there this morning." A pause. "Which means someone in town is reporting our movements." Calloway's hands tightened slightly on the reins. She noticed because she noticed most things. "Who knew we were going to the Dixons?" she said. "I told no one," he said. "Nor did I." She thought. But the horses were saddled early. Anyone who passed the stable this morning would have seen 2 horses ready before sunrise. "Jake Purvis runs the stable," Calloway said. 20 years in Red Hollow. Good man." "Does he owe anyone money?" A pause. "I don't know. Find out quietly," she said. "Not because I believe he's the source, but because we need to know every possible channel." She kept her voice even. "Whitmore has been here 3 weeks. That's enough time to buy a comfortable relationship with almost anyone who has a debt they'd prefer to settle." They rode in silence for a minute. "You think like an investigator," he said. "I think like someone who has been lied to by people she trusted," she said. "The outcome is similar." Another silence. Then, "When we get back, I need you to write up everything from the map. Full documentation the way you did the ledger analysis." "Already planning to." "Eliza." He said her name differently now than he had the first time 3 weeks ago. Easier, less deliberate, like a word that had found its natural weight. "What we have is good. The map, the ledger reconstruction, the Dixon deed, the Briggs letter as evidence of interference. It's not yet enough to take to a territorial judge, but it's close." "What's missing?" she said. "Whitmore's connection to the survey substitution. We can prove the documents were falsified. We can't yet prove he directed it." She thought. "Aldous? Aldous. He's still in town. Still conducting his survey," Calloway said. "Staying at the hotel." She was quiet for a moment. "He drinks." Calloway looked at her sideways. "How do you know that?" "The butcher's wife mentioned it. She said he and Whitmore were at the saloon until midnight twice last week. Men who drink with clients are usually drinking to manage something. Anxiety, guilt, the discomfort of knowing they've done something they can't undo." She paused. "Aldous made the substitutions. He knows exactly what he falsified and why and who told him to. He's carrying that." "A man carrying something like that," Calloway said slowly, "is a man who might eventually want to put it down." "Yes," she said, "if someone made that possible for him." They came into town on the North Road, passing the stable and the post office and the front of Martha Callahan's store, where Martha herself was sweeping the boardwalk with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who saw everything. Martha looked up as they passed. Her eyes went from Calloway to Eliza and back. She nodded once, very slightly, and went back to sweeping. Whitmore found Eliza alone 2 days later. She had not expected it, which she afterward considered a failure of anticipation she should not have allowed herself. She had been careful, she had been vigilant, but she had underestimated the degree to which a man like Whitmore would consider a woman in a sheriff's household a softer target than the sheriff himself. She was at the dry goods store alone on a Thursday afternoon when Calloway was at the land office reviewing property files. The store was empty, except for Martha behind the counter, and Whitmore came in with the particular ease of a man who moves through spaces as if he owns them, which in his estimation, he usually eventually did. "Mrs. Novak," he said. The fact that he knew her name, her full name, not just the sheriff's housekeeper, told her everything she needed to know about how thoroughly he had gathered his information. She turned. "Mr. Whitmore?" He was closer to handsome than she'd expected up close. Broad-shouldered, well-kept, with a smile that had been practiced until it looked effortless. He had the eyes of a man who had learned to make people feel seen, which was different from actually seeing them. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced," he said. "Gerald Whitmore. I represent the Continental Railroad Acquisition Office." "I know who you are," she said pleasantly. Something flickered in his eyes. "Of course. Small town." He clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture of openness, she noted, which was the gesture a man practiced when he wanted to appear unthreatening. "I wanted to introduce myself. I've been meaning to since I understand you've been a great help to Sheriff Calloway." "I'm his housekeeper," she said. "I keep the house. Of course." Another smile. "I only mention it because I've heard you're a woman of considerable practical intelligence. A talent for organization." A pause. "For records." She held his gaze and let the silence sit for exactly the right number of seconds, long enough to acknowledge what he'd implied, not long enough to respond to it. "I make sure the household accounts are in order," she said. "It's part of the position." "Naturally." He tilted his head slightly. "I wonder, and please forgive me if this seems forward, whether you've given thought to your situation after the winter is complete. The sheriff's arrangement is seasonal, I understand." "That's a private matter," she said. "Of course. Only the railroad will be establishing a regional office in Red Hollow come spring. We'll need organized, capable people." His voice remained warm, conversational. "Someone who understands records and correspondence. The salary would be considerably more than a housekeeper's wage." Martha behind the counter was making no noise whatsoever. Eliza looked at Whitmore with the same clear attention she gave to ledger columns and boundary maps. She saw him entirely, the offer inside the offer, the message beneath the message. He was not offering her a job. He was telling her that he knew what she had been doing, and he was giving her a choice between a reward and whatever came after she refused the reward. "That's a generous thought, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "I'll keep it in mind. Please do." He held her gaze one moment longer than natural. "It's always good to know which way the wind is blowing before winter sets in." He nodded pleasantly to Martha and walked out. The door closed. Martha came out from behind the counter with a cloth she didn't need to fold and stood near Eliza without touching her. "You all right?" Martha said. Not a question exactly. "Yes." Eliza's voice was steady. Her pulse was not, but that was private. "Mrs. Callahan, has Dan Aldous been in the store recently?" Martha looked at her for a moment. "Tuesday last, bought tobacco and a bottle of liniment. Looked like a man who hasn't been sleeping." "Did he say anything?" "Said the weather was getting worse." Martha paused. "Said he was thinking about heading back to Billings early." Eliza folded her parcel under her arm. "Thank you," she said. She walked home quickly, not because she was afraid she had committed to not being afraid, and she intended to keep that commitment, but because Whitmore had just told her without meaning to exactly how close they were running out of time. Aldous was about to leave, and if Aldous left Red Hollow before they could reach him, the one man who could confirm Whitmore's direction of the fraud would be gone. She was through the front door and at the kitchen table, with her notebook open, before she had fully taken off her coat. She wrote one sentence at the top of a clean page: Aldous. Before he leaves, how? And she started working. Calloway came home to find her still at the table, 3 pages of notes in front of her, and her coat still half on her shoulders, and he stopped in the doorway and read her face with the quickness of a man who had learned what her focus looked like when something was urgent. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. Whitmore in the store, the offer that wasn't an offer, what Martha had said about Aldous, the liniment, and the sleeplessness, and the early departure. When she finished, Calloway was sitting across from her, and the expression on his face had moved through several things and settled on something very specific. Cold focus decided. "He threatened you," Calloway said. "Whitmore." "He made an offer," she said. The threat was implied. "He threatened you in Martha Callahan's store." "Calloway, I want to be clear that I understand what happened," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled in the way that things are controlled when the effort costs something. She looked at him directly. "I'm not frightened of Gerald Whitmore." "I know you're not." A pause. "I am." The words landed differently than she expected. Not as weakness. Nothing about Ethan Calloway communicated weakness, but as something more honest than she was prepared for. "He knows what we've been doing," he continued. "He sent the rider to the Dixons. He approached you alone. He's not subtle anymore, which means he's not cautious anymore, which means he's moving to a different phase." He pressed his hands flat on the table. "We don't have weeks. We have days." "Aldous," she said. "Aldous," he agreed. "Tonight." She blinked. "You'll speak to him tonight?" "We'll speak to him tonight," Calloway said. And "we arrived without deliberation" the most natural word in the sentence. "You understand what he's carrying better than I do. You know the technical language. If I go alone, I'm a sheriff with accusations. If you're there, we're two people who can show him exactly what the documents say and what it means for him if this goes to court." She absorbed this. He may refuse. He may. Calloway's jaw was set. But a man who's buying liniment and can't sleep and is planning to run is a man who wants someone to stop him. She looked at her notes for a moment. "Give me an hour," she said. "I need to prepare what we're bringing him." He nodded and stood. He was almost to the door when she said, "Calloway." He turned. "Thank you," she said. "For the we." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Something she had no exact word for in English or Czech or German, but that she understood the way she understood cold air and honest silence and the warmth of a kitchen that had been properly tended. "Get your notes ready," he said gruffly, and she turned back to her work and the lamp burned steadily, and outside, the wind delivered its first genuine warning of winter to the walls of the house, and neither of them mentioned that the hour they spent preparing at that kitchen table was the first hour either of them had spent in a long time, not feeling entirely alone. Dan Aldous was in his hotel room when they knocked. He took long enough to answer that Eliza had time to hear through the door the specific sound of a man deciding whether to pretend he wasn't there. Then the sound of boots on floorboards. Then the door opened 4 inches, held by the weight of a man who had not yet committed to opening it fully. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-40s, perhaps, with the kind of face that had once been open and had since learned to close itself. He had the surveyor's habit of looking at things from the side, assessing distance and angle, without appearing to, but the assessment in his eyes right now was pure fear poorly contained. He looked at Calloway first, then at Eliza, then at the notebook under her arm. "Mr. Aldous," Calloway said, "we'd like to talk." "It's late," Aldous said. "It is," Calloway agreed. "Invite us in anyway." The 4 inches became a foot, then a doorway. Aldous stepped back. They entered. The room told Eliza what she needed to know within 10 seconds. A traveling case on the bed half-packed. Papers on the desk, some folded, some crumpled. A bottle of whiskey that was 3/4 empty, and had not been 3/4 empty at the start of the week, she was willing to bet. And on the nightstand, the liniment Martha had mentioned applied recently, judging by the smell. A man preparing to leave. A man whose hands hurt. A man who had not been sleeping. She pulled the single chair from the desk and sat down without being invited, because standing would have given him the option of remaining near the door, and she needed him seated and still. He sat on the edge of the bed. Calloway remained standing near the window. "I know why you're here," Aldous said. "Tell me," Calloway said. "You found something in the county records." Aldous looked at his own hands. "I don't know exactly what. But you went to the county seat, and then you went to the Dixon farm, and then—" He stopped. I heard you had visitors at the Dixon place, a rider. Whitmore's rider, Calloway said. Aldous flinched. Small, controlled, but real. Eliza opened her notebook. Mr. Aldous, I'm going to tell you what we have, and I'm going to do it plainly because we don't have the kind of time for anything else. She looked at him steadily. We have the original ledger showing boundary adjustments to 4 parcels with the original entries reconstructed from the pattern of overwriting. We have the Dixon family's hand-drawn survey map from 1869, signed by the original county surveyor, showing the Cottonwood boundary markers that the county road crew removed 18 months ago. We have the Heller deed referencing the same markers. And we have a letter from Tom Briggs refusing to release the replacement survey filings, which arrived 4 days after Whitmore dined with Sheriff Calloway. Aldous was looking at her now. Something in his face had moved past fear into something more complicated. You reconstructed the ledger, he said. Yes. From memory. From 8 minutes of reading, yes. She kept her voice even. I know what was there before it was changed. I know what was changed and in which direction and why. I can demonstrate this in a territorial court in language clear enough for any judge to follow. A silence. If this goes to a territorial judge, Eliza continued, the falsification of county survey documents is a criminal matter. The penalties include imprisonment. She paused. For everyone whose signature appears on the replacement filings. Aldous stood up abruptly and went to the window. Stood there with his back to them. I didn't know what he was going to do with it, he said, to the window. When Whitmore approached me, he said it was a routine boundary clarification. That the original surveys were imprecise and needed updating for the railroad's planning purposes. His voice had gone rough. He had documentation. Letters from the county commissioner. Everything looked... He stopped. I should have asked more questions. Yes, Calloway said. Not harshly, just plainly. By the time I understood what the corrections actually did. Aldous turned around. His face was a man's face when he has run out of the energy required to hide things. The filings were already processed. Briggs had signed them. If I raised a concern, I was already on the wrong side of it. My signature was already there. I know, Eliza said quietly. He looked at her. Then you know I'm finished either way. No, she said. You're not. He waited. If this goes to court without your cooperation, she said carefully, you're the man who filed the falsified documents. Your signature, your professional license, your career. Whitmore's lawyers will present you as the originating fraud. He will walk away clean, and you will not. She held his gaze. But if you provide a written account of Whitmore's instructions, what he asked you to change when and how he framed it, you become a witness, not a defendant. A man who was deceived and then coerced who came forward when given the opportunity. Aldous looked at Calloway. You can guarantee that? I can't guarantee what a judge does, Calloway said. But I can put your cooperation on record with the Territorial Marshal's office before Whitmore has a chance to move. And I can make certain the court understands the full context of how those filings were obtained. The letters, Eliza said. Whitmore wrote to you. The instructions came in writing. Aldous went very still. He did, she said. Not a question. A long moment. They're in my case, Aldous said finally. I kept them because I don't know why I kept them. I should have burned them. He looked at the half-packed traveling case on the bed. Maybe I kept them because some part of me knew this was coming. Calloway crossed the room in 4 steps and stood beside the case. Aldous didn't move. Then he sat back down on the bed, reached into the case, and pulled out a folded leather document wallet. He held it out. Calloway took it. He opened it, looked at the top letter for 30 seconds, and then looked at Eliza. She reached for it and read it. The letter was from Whitmore on Continental Railroad Acquisition Office, letterhead, dated 8 months prior. It was professionally worded, which was almost worse than if it had been crude the language of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how to frame instructions that could sound like suggestions. It referenced specific parcel numbers. It referenced specific boundary adjustments. It used the phrase updating to reflect current survey standards 4 times, which was the kind of repetition that revealed itself as deliberate once you knew what you were looking at. "He told you which parcels," she said. "And by how much," Aldous said. "The measurements are in the second letter." She turned to the second letter. The measurements were there, exact, precise, professionally presented. Enough to move the boundaries. Enough to capture the water rights. Enough to ruin 4 families who had farmed this valley for 20 years. She looked up at Calloway. "This is it," she said quietly. He looked at the letters, then at her. Something shifted in his face. Not relief, not yet, but the specific quality of a man who has been carrying a heavy load uphill and has just seen the top of the hill for the first time. "Mr. Aldous," he said, "I need you to write and sign a statement tonight. Everything how Whitmore approached you, what he promised, what he threatened, when you hesitated, and the exact nature of the instructions he gave you." "And then," Aldous said, "and then you don't leave Red Hollow until this is resolved," Calloway said. "You stay, you cooperate, you put your name to what you know." A pause. "That's the only version of this that helps you." Aldous looked at the half-packed case for a long moment. "How long?" he said. 2 weeks, maybe less." Calloway's voice was steady and direct. "I'm sending everything to the territorial marshal tomorrow. With those letters, the documentation Eliza has prepared, and your statement, there is no version of this where Whitmore's acquisition moves forward. The question is only what happens to everyone else." Eliza handed Aldous her notebook, open to a blank page and a pencil. He looked at it. "Start with the date of first contact," she said, "and write what you remember. I'll help you organize it when you're done." He took the notebook, and he started writing. They were in the hotel corridor an hour later, the statement folded inside the document wallet, with Whitmore's letters, and Eliza's hands were steady in the way of a woman who has been keeping them steady through deliberate effort and can now allow herself to acknowledge how hard the effort was. Calloway was walking beside her, close enough that their shoulders were nearly level. "You knew he'd kept the letters," he said. "I suspected," she said. "Men who can't sleep are usually keeping something. It's easier to hold on to evidence of your own wrongdoing than to destroy it, because destroying it makes it real in a way that keeping it doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You talked him into it. He was halfway out the door and you talked him back." "I showed him his options," she said. "He made his own decision." "Eliza." He stopped walking. She stopped too, because his stopping had a quality of intention. "You walked into that room," he said, "with a man who had every reason to lie, throw us out, and be on the morning train. And you sat down like you belonged there, and you laid every card on the table, and you gave him a way out he didn't know he had." He looked at her directly, and there was nothing professional in his expression right now, nothing careful or contained. "That was the most." He stopped himself. She waited. "That was something I could not have done alone," he said. It was not the sentence he had started to say. She was certain of that. But it was the sentence he finished with, and she understood in the way she understood most things about Ethan Calloway. By now, that finishing it differently would have cost him more than he was prepared to spend in a hotel corridor at 9 o'clock at night. "I know," she said simply, and she started walking again. The next morning, Calloway sent the full package to the territorial marshal's office. Aldous' statement, Whitmore's letters, Eliza's ledger, reconstruction, the Dixon map, documentation, the Briggs letter, and a 2-page cover summary that Eliza had drafted at the kitchen table before 6 in the morning in the plain, precise language of a woman who had spent 7 years writing things that needed to be understood by people who didn't want to understand them. He sent it with the fastest writer he trusted, a young deputy named Cole, who had the good sense to leave before the sun was fully up and not tell anyone where he was going. By noon, Red Hollow had no idea anything had changed. By noon, Whitmore was at the hotel restaurant eating a meal that cost more than most families in the valley spent on food in a week, discussing with two associates the spring filing schedule that he believed was still on track. By noon, Eliza had made bread, reorganized the larder for winter, fixed the loose board on the back porch step that she had noted on her first day, and not yet gotten to, and was sitting at the kitchen table when Calloway came home with the look of a man who had set something irreversible in motion and was living in the specific tension of what comes after. "Coal's away clean," he said. No one followed. Good. He poured coffee, sat down, and was quiet for a moment. "Whitmore will know soon," he said. "Once the marshal's office makes contact, he'll know we moved." "Yes." "He's going to react." "Yes," she said again. "I want you to be careful." He looked at the table. "More careful than you have been." "I've been very careful." "I know you have." He lifted his eyes. "I want you to be more careful than that." Something in his voice, not the words, but the quality beneath them, made her look at him more closely. He was holding the coffee cup in both hands, not drinking from it in the way of a man using an object as an anchor. "Calloway," she said. "What are you not saying?" A pause. "I went to the stable this morning," he said. "Before I sent coal, I spoke to Jake Purvis." He set the cup down. "Jake owes money to a lender in Billings who has connections to the railroad's regional development arm." He paused. "Whitmore found him inside the first week." Eliza sat with this. "How much did he report?" she said. "Enough. Our movements. The Dixon trip. The times I've come and gone." His jaw was tight. Jake didn't know what it was for. He thought he was paying off a debt by passing information to a businessman. He didn't understand. He didn't want to understand, she said, not harshly, just honestly. "No." Calloway looked at his hands. "I relieved him of his duties this morning, temporarily. He's not... I don't think he's a bad man, he was a frightened one. But the channel is closed now." "Which Whitmore will know," she said. "Because Jake will tell him, or because Jake will suddenly stop reporting, and Whitmore will draw his own conclusions. Either way, Whitmore will know we know about the channel, and he'll move to something less visible." Calloway looked at her steadily. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "That we've entered the phase where Whitmore stops being careful," she said. "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet. "All right," she said. "Then we move faster than he does. The marshal will need 2 weeks minimum to review the package and make contact." 2 weeks?" she said. "A lot can happen in 2 weeks." He nodded. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that 2 weeks was also a long time to remain a target in a small town with no walls to hide behind. Whitmore made his move 4 days later. He made it as men like him often did through the most available and least expected channel. He made it public. At a town meeting called ostensibly to discuss winter road maintenance, a meeting that Calloway attended as a matter of routine, and Eliza did not attend because she was not invited to town meetings, being a woman and a foreigner and a housekeeper, all of which Red Hollow found collectively disqualifying. Whitmore stood up during the open portion and addressed the assembled citizens of Red Hollow with the warm, confident authority of a man who had given this speech before and knew exactly which notes it played. He talked about the railroad. He talked about prosperity. He talked about the future of the Montana Territory and the opportunities it presented for families willing to embrace progress. He was, by every account she received afterward, utterly charming and entirely persuasive. And then, in the last 5 minutes, he said it had come to his attention that certain individuals had been interfering with the railroad's legitimate survey operations, that documents had been improperly accessed, that a foreign national recently arrived in Red Hollow under unclear circumstances had been involved in examining county records to which she had no legal right. He did not say Eliza's name. He didn't need to. She heard it from Martha Callahan, who arrived at the back door 40 minutes after the meeting ended, with a face that told Eliza everything before a word was said. "He didn't name you," Martha said. "But there's only one foreign woman in this town." I know. Eliza kept her voice level. What was the room's reaction? Split. Martha sat down without being invited, which meant she was genuinely troubled. Some people believe him. He's polished and he has money, and money talks in a place that hasn't seen much of it. But the Hellers were there, and the Dixons. She paused. And Harold Dixon stood up and said that his family's water rights were not the railroad's business, and that any man claiming otherwise had better come with better documentation than a speech. Eliza looked at her. Harold said that. Clara was next to him, Martha said, looking like a woman who would pick up a fence post if required. Something moved through Eliza's chest. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition of people choosing a side when choosing a side costs something. And Calloway, she said. Calloway stood up after Whitmore finished, Martha said. Said only that the sheriff's office was conducting a legal inquiry into county land records, and that he expected all parties to conduct themselves accordingly. Martha looked at her steadily. He was calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that tells a room this is serious without telling the room why. He handled it right, Eliza said. He did. Martha leaned forward. Eliza, Whitmore naming you even without the name that changes things. There are people in this town who will be watching you now with different eyes. People who don't know you well enough to... Martha. Eliza met her eyes. I know. A pause. You've been here before, Martha said. Not a question. Yes. And? And I'm still here, Eliza said, simply. Martha looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, stood, and left the way she'd come. Calloway came home with the meeting still on his face. He didn't have to tell her. She told him what Martha had reported, what Harold Dixon had said, what the room's reaction had been. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was his version of respect. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's trying to make you the story, he said, instead of the land fraud. Yes, if the town is talking about the foreign woman who was meddling in county records, they're not talking about 3 families whose boundaries were falsified. She looked at him. It's effective. He knows it's effective. He's done it before I could hear it in how the words were arranged. It affects you. He said it carefully, the way he said things he wasn't sure how they'd land. Your position here. My reputation, she said. Yes, I know. I can speak to people, tell them exactly what role you've played and why it was legitimate and necessary. No, she said, firmly. The same word she'd said weeks ago, and he heard it the same way, not as refusal of help, but as definition of terms. He stopped. Calloway. She looked at him directly. If you defend me publicly, you make me something that needed defending. That's the story Whitmore wants. The foreign woman who couldn't stand on her own, who had to be protected by the man whose house she worked in. She shook her head. I will not be that story. Then what? He said. We wait, she said, for the marshal, for the legal process to do what it was built to do. And in the meantime, I go about my work. I go to the store. I speak to people normally. I do not hide, and I do not explain myself, and I do not ask anyone for their good opinion. She held his gaze. Because a woman who is guilty of something hides. A woman who is not doesn't. He looked at her for a long time. You are, he said slowly, the most. He stopped again. Second time in as many days he had started a sentence he didn't finish. She waited. And this time she waited longer. The most determined person I have ever met, he said finally, quietly. In my life. She heard what was underneath it. She heard all of it, the sentence that kept starting and stopping, the thing that lived in the space between what he said and what he meant. She heard it the way she heard everything about this man by now, not through what he offered, which was never much, but through what she had learned to read in the negative space around his words. And it frightened her slightly how clearly she could hear it. The marshal will come, she said. Because that was the ground they stood on, the practical and the possible, the thing she could hold without losing her footing. And when he does, the documents will speak for themselves. They always do. "And until then," he said. "Until then," she said, "I make supper." She turned to the stove. Behind her, she heard him exhale, not a sigh, something shorter, something that released a small measure of whatever he'd been holding, and then she heard the scrape of his chair as he sat down, and she knew without turning that he was watching her, and she chose not to turn because some things required distance to be manageable. She made supper. He stayed at the table, and the house held them both in its warmth and outside. Red Hollow talked and watched and made its judgments, and in the kitchen of a plain clapboard house on the edge of a winter that hadn't yet arrived, two people who had each spent a long time alone sat on opposite sides of something they had not named, and both of them knew, without saying it, that the naming was coming, that it was already too late to avoid it, that neither of them, if pressed, would have chosen to. The trouble arrived the following morning before the coffee was done. There was a knock on the front door at 7:30. Not a polite knock, a knock with intention behind it. Calloway answered it while Eliza was at the stove and she heard voices she didn't recognize, and then Calloway's voice, and then a silence that told her to come to the door. She came to the door. On the porch stood two men in suits. Not Whitmore, but the kind of men Whitmore employed with the polished shoes and careful hands of lawyers, or close approximations thereof. Behind them at the gate, she could see Jake Purvis looking at the ground. The taller of the two men had a document in his hand. "Sheriff Calloway," he said. "We represent the Continental Railroad Acquisition Office. We have a court injunction from the county seat issued this morning, requiring that all documents and records pertaining to Red Hollow parcel surveys, currently in the possession of any private individual, be surrendered to the county clerk's office within 48 hours. Eliza heard the words in order, and heard each one land, and understood within the space of a breath what had happened. Whitmore hadn't waited for the marshal. He had gone to the county system, Briggs Aldous, whoever he still had, and gotten ahead of them. He was trying to seize the documents before the territorial authority arrived. She looked at the injunction in the man's hand. "May I see that?" she said. Both men looked at her with the particular expression men wore when a woman spoke in a professional context, and they hadn't arranged for that to happen. "This is Sheriff Calloway's residence," the taller man said. To Calloway. "She's asking to see the document," Calloway said, evenly. "Show her." A pause. The man held it out grudgingly. Eliza took it, read it again, and felt something specific and precise happen in her mind, the sensation of a pattern clicking into place. "This injunction," she said, "references parcel documents held by private individuals. It was issued by the county court." She looked at Calloway. "The county court, whose clerk is Tom Briggs." "Yes," he said. He had read it too. "A county court injunction does not supersede a territorial marshal's inquiry," she said. "Once the marshal's office has opened, an investigation county jurisdiction is subordinate." The taller man's expression shifted. "The territorial marshal has not yet made contact with Red Hollow," Eliza said. "That is correct. But the inquiry has been opened. The documents were received 4 days ago." She handed the injunction back with the care of a woman returning something she has no further need of. "This injunction was filed this morning. The territorial inquiry precedes it by 4 days. A silence. "We would need documentation of that inquiry," the man said. "Of course," Calloway said. "Come back with your client and his lawyers when you have a territorial judge available to hear the jurisdiction question. I'll have coffee on." The two men looked at each other. 48 hours, the taller one said. "The injunction stands until—" "The injunction is noted," Calloway said. "Good morning." He closed the door, turned around. Eliza was already at the kitchen table, her notebook open. "He's going to escalate," she said. "The injunction was his first move. He expected it to work because he expected us not to know territorial procedure." "He underestimated what you know," Calloway said. "He underestimated what 7 years of managing documents for men who didn't explain their reasons teaches you." She was already writing. "We need to send word to the marshal today. Not a letter, a rider. Cole again if you trust him. He needs to know that Whitmore is attempting to use the county system to seize the documents before the territorial authority can act, and we need the marshal to send confirmation of the inquiry's status in writing by return. That's 3 days minimum. I know. She kept writing. Which means we have 3 days to hold Whitmore off with procedure, and we need every piece of documentation we have stored somewhere he cannot reach it with a county injunction. The Dixon map, Calloway said, is at the Dixon farm in Clara's mother's Bible box, she said. Safe. My ledger reconstruction and the full analysis are... She stopped writing and looked at him. Calloway, I need you to take them, not keep them here. Take them somewhere outside this house. Where? Martha Callahan, she said immediately. She's the most trusted person in Red Hollow. She's not legally connected to any of this, and if she keeps documents under her counter with her store inventory, no county injunction touches them without a specific warrant naming her. He looked at her. You trust Martha. I trust Martha, she said. And I think Martha trusts me, which in a town this size is the same as a legal bond. He picked up his coat. I'll go now, he said, before his people are watching the house. She handed him the folded documents, 6 pages tight and precise, everything she'd reconstructed. His hand closed around them. For a moment, they were both holding the documents. Neither moved. Eliza, he said. His voice had a quality she had only heard from him once before in the hotel corridor after Aldous. Something stripped of its professional exterior. She looked up. When this is over, he said. And then he stopped. And the stopping was different from all the other times he had stopped, not because he didn't have the words, but because he was choosing very deliberately to say them or not. She waited. When this is over, he said again, we need to talk. I know, she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he walked out the door, and she turned back to her notebook, and her hand was not entirely steady, and she let it be unsteady because they were alone, and she no longer had to manage the geography of her own feelings as if they were a document to be kept in order. She sat in the kitchen and thought about what came after, when this is over, and for the first time in 14 months, the answer did not feel like a closed door. Cole came back in 2 days, not 3. He arrived before dawn on a Tuesday, riding hard enough that Eliza heard the hoofbeats from her room and was downstairs before Calloway had his boots on. Cole was 23 and not given to dramatics, which meant the look on his face when he came through the door was information in itself. Marshal Harding is coming personally, Cole said. Left Billings yesterday morning. He'll be here by Thursday. Calloway took the sealed letter Cole handed him, read it standing in the kitchen doorway, and passed it to Eliza without comment. She read it. Marshal William Harding. Territorial Marshal's Office acknowledged receipt of all documentation. Confirmed the inquiry was formally opened as of 6 days prior. Confirmed that all county-level proceedings related to Red Hollow parcel disputes were hereby subordinate to territorial jurisdiction. Confirmed that Gerald Whitmore and associates were now persons of interest in an active fraud investigation. And at the bottom, in a different hand than the formal letter, a postscript brief and direct. Tell whoever put this package together that it's the clearest documentation I've seen in 15 years of this work. Don't let them move those documents. Eliza folded the letter. He's coming himself, she said. That means he believes what we sent him, Calloway said. It means he knows it's solid enough to move on quickly. She set the letter on the table. Whitmore has until Thursday. They looked at each other. He'll know the marshal is coming, Cole said, pulling off his gloves. Word travels on the road. Travelers talk. I pass 2 wagons heading south if either of them mention a marshal's party riding north. Whitmore will know by tonight, Calloway said. Then we have 1 day, Eliza said. Maybe less. She was already at the table, her notebook open. He has 3 options, she said, thinking aloud the way she had learned she could do in this kitchen without being interrupted or managed. He can run, which loses him everything and confirms the fraud. He can stay and fight through lawyers, which requires the county documents he doesn't fully control anymore. Or he can do something drastic before the marshal arrives. She looked at Calloway. Which one is he? He doesn't run, Calloway said immediately. Men like Whitmore don't run. Running is an admission. Lawyers, then, or drastic? Both, Cole said quietly. Both of them looked at him. He shrugged with the economy of a young man who had been paying attention. He'll file something with whoever he still has at the county seat, try to create a legal tangle that slows the marshal down. And while the lawyers are talking, something else happens. Eliza looked at Calloway. The boy's right, Calloway said. Then we don't wait for him to choose, she said. We move first. She turned a page. You need to have Whitmore and his 2 associates in a position where they cannot act before the marshal arrives. You're the sheriff. What are your legal grounds for holding them temporarily? I can't arrest a man for a fraud I haven't formally charged him with yet. I didn't say arrest, she said. I said hold. You're the law in Red Hollow. A business dispute that touches on public safety gives you authority to require parties to remain available for inquiry. She paused. If Whitmore was making representations to landowners at that town meeting that you believe constitute potential fraud on the public, I can require him to remain in town pending inquiry, Calloway said slowly. Can you enforce it? I'm the sheriff, he said. In this county, on this ground, yes. Then do it today, she said, before he knows the marshal is personally coming, while he still thinks he has time. Calloway looked at Cole. Go get some sleep. 2 hours. Then to Eliza. I'll go to the hotel this morning. Take the marshal's letter, she said. Show him the official inquiry confirmation. Let him read it himself. Watch his face when he reads the postscript. She met his eyes. He needs to understand that the ground shifted while he wasn't watching. And if he pushes back, he will push back, she said. He'll threaten lawyers and county officials and political connections. Let him. Every threat he makes in front of you is a statement you can put in a report. She paused. And Calloway, whatever he says about me in that room, don't react to it. He looked at her sharply. What will he say about you? Whatever damages me most, she said calmly. He's been building a version of this story where I'm the problem, a foreign woman with unclear motives who manipulated the sheriff's household to access confidential records. He will say it directly to your face in a private room to see if it lands. She held his gaze. It won't land, but your reaction to it will tell him how much it can cost you. Don't give him that. A silence. You've planned for him to say that, Calloway said. I've planned for everything he might use, she said. That's what I do. He picked up his hat. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, his face had something on it. She had no word for something that had been building for 7 weeks, and was now too large for the ordinary container of his expression. When this is over, he said. 3rd time. Same words. I know, she said. Same answer. And he left. She spent the morning at Martha Callahan's store. Not hiding, she had committed to not hiding, and she kept commitments, but working in the practical sense. Martha had allowed the documents to live under the back counter in a flour sack that looked entirely indistinguishable from 24 other flour sacks. And Eliza went to retrieve them now that the marshal's confirmation made the county injunction legally void. Martha handed the flour sack over without ceremony. Calloway went to the hotel, Martha said. Yes. Whitmore's people are watching the street. Martha said it without looking up from her inventory. 2 of them. Been there since early. Eliza tucked the flour sack under her arm. They're watching for documents being moved. That'd be my read. Then I'll walk home directly, Eliza said, through the main street, in plain sight, with a flour sack that looks exactly like a flour sack. Martha looked at her then. The corner of her mouth moved. You want company? I wouldn't object to it. Martha untied her apron and came around the counter. They walked down the main street of Red Hollow together, 2 women with errands and no particular urgency, and Whitmore's 2 watchers tracked them with their eyes, and saw nothing worth reporting a dry goods owner and a housekeeper with flour going about their Tuesday morning. At the gate to Calloway's house, Martha stopped. "You're going to be all right," Martha said. Not a question, an assertion. "Yes," Eliza said. Also an assertion. Martha nodded, walked back. Eliza went inside, put the documents on the kitchen table, and made coffee, and waited for Calloway to come home. He came home at noon. She knew from the sound of his boots on the porch, a particular rhythm that indicated he was moving deliberately, carrying something he needed to set down, and she had the coffee poured before he was through the door. He sat, drank, said nothing for 40 seconds, which she had learned to allow. "He knows the marshal is coming," he said. "Who told him?" "Doesn't matter. He knew before I walked in." He set the cup down. He was polished. He had a lawyer-present man named Forsyth out of Billings arrive this morning. Fast for a lawyer. He looked at the table. Forsyth tried to argue the territorial inquiry was irregular, that the documentation chain was compromised, because it involved a private individual with no legal standing to access county records. Eliza's jaw tightened. And I put the marshal's letter on the table and let Forsyth read the postscript. Something moved through Calloway's face. Forsyth is a good lawyer. He read it twice, and then he was very quiet for a moment, and that quiet told me he knows the case is solid. What did Whitmore say? Calloway's eyes came up to hers. He said that the records analysis had been performed by an immigrant woman of uncertain background without legal authority, who had entered his household under false pretenses, and who had a personal grievance against the railroad's acquisition practices due to a prior property dispute in her country of origin. He paused. He said that anything she touched was tainted, that her testimony would be worthless, that any court would see her for what she was. The kitchen was very quiet. "And," Eliza said, "steady." "And I told him," Calloway said, and his voice had dropped to something she had not heard from him before, quieter than his ordinary quiet and harder, that the woman in question had produced the most accurate and comprehensive legal documentation I had seen in 18 years of law enforcement. That her reconstruction of the county records would be submitted in full to the territorial court, supported by the Dixon family map, the Aldous statement, his own letters, and the testimony of 4 landowning families. And that if he had concerns about her standing, he was welcome to raise them with Marshal Harding on Thursday. A silence. Then I told him he was required to remain in Red Hollow pending the marshal's inquiry, Calloway continued. And I told Forsyth that if his client left this county before Thursday, I would file obstruction and have them both returned under escort. Did Forsyth push back? He looked at his client, and then he said they would cooperate fully with the marshal's office. Calloway's mouth was tight. Whitmore did not look at me when they said it. Eliza sat with that. "He knows it's over," she said. "He knows it's over," Calloway agreed. "The question now is how much damage he tries to do on the way out." She nodded, turned to the documents on the table. "Then we spend today making sure everything is in the order the marshal needs. Every document, every supporting reference, every cross-notation." She looked at him. "I want it to be so clear that there is no question in the marshal's mind about any single figure or date or boundary measurement. You've already been working on it." "Since 6 this morning," she said. "But I want you to review it with me. You know this county better than I do. If there's anything that needs contextual explanation, a reference to local geography, a name and office, you provide it, and I'll note it in the margins." He pulled his chair closer to the table, and they worked. For 5 hours side by side at that kitchen table, they went through every page of documentation with the focused, unhurried thoroughness of 2 people who understood that this was not about finishing quickly, but about finishing right. He knew the land. She knew the numbers. Between them, they built something that was more complete than either could have assembled alone. And by the time the light changed and the afternoon began, its retreat toward evening, the stack of organized cross-referenced documents on that table was the clearest account of Gerald Whitmore's fraud that anyone had yet assembled. Eliza set down her pen. Her hand ached in the specific way of a hand that has been writing for hours, and she pressed her palm flat against the table to ease it, and Calloway, sitting 18 inches to her left, watched her do it. "Your hand," he said. "It's fine. You've been writing for 5 hours." "I know. It's fine." She flexed her fingers. "It's done, all of it." He looked at the stack of documents, then at her. "Eliza." He said her name in the way he'd been saying it for weeks, like a word that had found its natural place in his mouth and didn't need announcing. "I need to tell you something before Thursday." She looked at him. "I need to tell you," he said, "because after the marshal comes and this is resolved, things will move quickly and He stopped. "I have not been good at saying things, in general, to anyone, for a long time." "I know," she said. "I want to try anyway." She waited. He looked at the documents, then at his hands, then at her. And the looking at her was the most direct it had ever been. Nothing held back. Nothing managed. "When I put that advertisement in the paper," he said, "I was looking for someone to keep the house from falling apart. That was all I thought it was. A practical arrangement." A pause. "I want you to know that I understand now that what you came here and did, what you built in this house, and what you found in that ledger, and what you did in that hotel room with Aldous, and every decision you made about how to fight this in a way that left your dignity intact, none of that was what I hired. None of that was in any advertisement." She was very still. "You did not come here to save anyone," he continued. "I know that. You came here to save yourself, and somewhere in the process of doing that, you—" He stopped, took a breath. "You made it so that I cannot imagine this house without you in it. And I have been sitting with that for 3 weeks not saying it, because I did not know what I had the right to ask of a woman who came here with nothing and has built something out of it through her own labor and her own intelligence and no one's help." The kitchen was so quiet Eliza could hear the fire in the stove. "You have the right to leave in March," he said. "That was the arrangement. I will not ask you to stay on the basis of what I feel, because what I feel is not a reason that earns anything from you." He met her eyes fully. "But I want you to know what it is, so that when you make your decision about March, you make it with the full information." She looked at him. She thought about Joseph and Bohemia, and 60 days to contest a falsified document, and no one willing to help her do it. She thought about Denver, and 8 months of work she was capable of, and positions she was offered, and offers she refused because they required her to be smaller than she was. She thought about stepping off a train in the gray Montana morning and seeing a tired man with a badge and walking directly toward him because she had learned that the only direction worth moving was forward. She thought about a kitchen that had been cold and was now warm, and a stove she had fixed, and a ledger she had read, and a flour sack walked down a main street, and a postscript that said, "Clearest documentation I've seen in 15 years. She thought about we. "I need to tell you something also," she said. He waited. "I came here because I was running out of options," she said. "That is true, and I will not dress it up as something more romantic, because you have been honest with me, and you deserve honesty back." She held his gaze. "But I have been in this house for 7 weeks, and in that time I have fixed the stove, and the window frame, and the porch step, and the curtains, and the ledger, and the land records for 3 families, and I have done all of that because it needed doing, and I was capable of doing it. Not because of you." "I know," he said. "I need you to hear that part first," she said. "Because everything else I say after it has to come after it, or it doesn't mean what I need it to mean." "I hear it," he said, quietly, completely. "Good." She looked at him steadily. "The rest is that this is the first place I have been in 14 months where being capable was not a problem to be managed, where I was not too much or too educated or too direct or too foreign." She paused. "You gave me the key to the desk. You said we in a hotel corridor without thinking about it. You told a man in a private room that my documentation was the basis of an 18-year career's worth of trust, and then you came home and told me about it." She took one breath. "That is not nothing, Calloway. to someone who has been told for a long time that she is nothing that is not nothing at all. He looked at her. Something in his face had come undone, in the way that faces come undone when they have been holding a particular expression for so long, they've forgotten it was an expression. "Ethan," he said. "My name is Ethan." She looked at him. "You've called me Calloway for 7 weeks," he said. "I would like you to use my name." The simplicity of it hit her somewhere she hadn't expected. "Ethan?" she said. He closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. "Stay," he said. "After March. Not as a housekeeper. Not as an arrangement." He looked at her with everything in his face, nothing behind it. "Stay, because this is where you've built something, and because I would like very much to keep building it with you." She did not answer immediately. She had learned in the years she had been navigating the world alone to be careful with her yeses. A yes given too quickly was a yes given without full accounting, and she was a woman of accounts. She measured things. She verified before she filed. But she had also learned in 7 weeks in this kitchen that some things did not require measurement. Some things were already documented. Some things you looked at the full record and you knew. "I will need," she said slowly, "to renegotiate the terms." Something shifted in his face. Almost a smile. The closest she had seen to it. "Name them," he said. "I keep the accounts," she said. "Household and otherwise. I don't defer to you on decisions that affect this property. I write my own correspondence. I speak at meetings if I have something to say." She looked at him. "And you call me by my name?" "Eliza," he said immediately. "Yes," she said. "Like that." A silence that was not empty. Had not been empty for some time. "Agreed," he said. "All of it." She looked at him for one more moment, this man who had handed her a key, and said, "We," and come home in the dark after 3 hard days, and let her think out loud at the kitchen table, and told a polished railroad man that her documentation was the foundation of his professional trust, and she made the decision. She had already, she was now willing to admit, been making for weeks. "Then I'll stay," she said. Marshall Harding arrived Thursday morning one day ahead of the snow. He was a tall man, spare with the particular economy of movement that came from 30 years of work in difficult places. He read the documents in Calloway's office for 3 hours, asked Eliza 6 precise questions, all of which she answered precisely, and at the end of it, he looked at the 2 of them across the desk and said, "This is the cleanest fraud case I have seen in this territory in a decade. Whoever organized this documentation saved this county significant time and money." He looked at Eliza specifically when he said it. She inclined her head. Whitmore was formally detained that afternoon. Forsyth, the lawyer, negotiated. Forsyth was good as Calloway had said, but the letters with the exact measurement instructions were the kind of evidence good lawyers recognized as walls and stopped walking toward. The Continental Railroad Acquisition Office, when contacted by the Marshal's office, moved with the speed of a large organization distancing itself from a liability and confirmed that Whitmore had operated outside his authorized parameters, and they were fully cooperative with the territorial investigation. Whitmore, in the end, was the only one left holding the thing he had built. Dan Aldis's cooperation was formally noted. He lost his surveyor's license, that was unavoidable, and he knew it, and he took it with the quiet of a man who had known for months it was coming and was relieved to stop waiting. Tom Briggs was found to have been deceived rather than complicit, confirmed by the absence of any correspondence acknowledging the nature of the substitutions, which was the thing Eliza had said it would confirm. The Dixon water rights were confirmed. The Heller boundaries were restored. The 2 southern parcels were resurveyed by a Marshal's office appointee using the original ledger records that Eliza had reconstructed, confirmed against the Dixon map, and filed correctly in the county system. The cottonwood trees could not be restored, but the record of them could, and was. On the Saturday after the Marshal left, Harold Dixon came to the door. Clara was with him. They had the look of people who had ridden some distance and did not regret it. Harold Dixon shook Calloway's hand for a long time without words. Then he turned to Eliza. He didn't shake her hand. He looked at her for a moment with the face of a man who has survived something and knows exactly who helped him do it. "My grandfather kept that map," he said, "because the surveyor told him a family copy was a family's protection." He paused. "I think he was right. And I think the protection works better when the right person knows how to read it." Clara Dixon stepped forward and took Eliza's hand in both of hers. Held it. "You come visit us," Clara said. "When the snow clears, we'll have you for supper." "I would like that very much," Eliza said. After they left, she stood on the porch in the cold for a moment, and she thought about a woman standing on a train platform with a worn leather bag and a dead husband's ring in her pocket. And she thought about what it cost to keep moving when everything behind you was gone and nothing in front of you was certain. She had kept moving. She had not known when she stepped off that train what Red Hollow would give her. She had only known what she was capable of, and she had brought that with her. And she had laid it down in a cold kitchen, and a locked ledger, and a hotel room, and a flour sack, walked down a main street, and it had been enough. It had been exactly enough. That evening, Ethan Calloway came into the kitchen while she was making supper, and stood beside her at the stove, not behind her, not in the doorway, but beside her close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, in the way she was aware of a stove that was working properly, and he did not say anything. She handed him the wooden spoon. "Stir," she said. "Clockwise. Don't let it catch on the bottom." He took the spoon. She moved to the other side of the stove to check the bread. "Eliza," he said. She looked over. "Thank you," he said, the same plain way he'd said, "I'm sorry" weeks ago. No performance, no decoration. The words meaning exactly what they were. She looked at him for a moment. This man stirring soup in his own kitchen with the focused, conscientious attention he gave everything who had said "we" without thinking who had asked her to use his name. "Don't let it catch on the bottom," she said again. He stirred. And the kitchen was warm, and the bread was rising, and outside the snow that had been threatening for weeks finally arrived quietly, without announcement covering Red Hollow. In the particular silence of a world that has decided to start over, and inside the house, two people who had each spent a long time alone stood side by side in a kitchen they had both in different ways and for different reasons chosen. Not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they had looked at the full record and they had measured it carefully, and they had each in the end filed the same answer. This was where they stayed. This was where they belonged. And some things once documented in the language of daily labor and shared trust and plain words offered without performance do not require further proof. They simply stand, the way honest records stand clear and unalterable for as long as anyone cares to look.